First of all, thank you all for joining us online today and for joining this research seminar series. As you know, we started this research seminar series in 2024, and the scope of the seminar series is really to bring together new research around creative economies in Africa and to have a platform for sharing these new research ideas. The seminar series was funded by the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at King's College London, and we recently received the new funding from Circle U, which will stretch further the events and the activities that we can organize in 2015 and 2026. I'm Roberta Comunian. I'm one of the co-leads of the Cluster of Research Excellence on Creative Economies in Africa, and I'm hosting here our fourth talk. And I'm very pleased to welcome Alessandro Jedlowski, who is Associate Professor in African Studies at Sciences Po in Bordeaux. And his main research interests are African screen media industries and South-South cultural media circulation networks and interaction between media and migration. Alessandro will talk with us today about his recent research on YouTube and Nollywood under the title Hidden in Plain Sight, YouTube and Nollywood Reinvention of Minor Transnational Practices. And we'll give Alessandro around half an hour to tell us everything about his work. And after that, there will be space for questions and clarifications. So if you have any questions, just hold on to the screen for the moment. Or if you want to use the Q&A facility, pop the question there, and we'll answer all the questions at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, Alessandro, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Roberta, and thank you everyone for being here today. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to present a little part of my ongoing research. Before I start sharing my screen, just a couple of words to introduce myself. So as Roberta was saying, I've been doing work on African screen media industries over the past few years, mostly on Nollywood. But not only, I've been more recently working also in Côte d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, and over the past couple of years, my research, as it happened to many of us being interested in African media and cinema, has reoriented itself toward new media and platforms and how these developments are transforming both the economy, but also spectatorship of African screen media industry. So today I will present a piece of research that was done in relation to a research network that have emerged over the past few years, which connects a few scholars from across countries of the global South or working on media and film industries in the South. Around precisely the topic of how digital platforms are transforming the economy and of production and circulation in these industries, and how they're also transforming the way people consume media in these places. So I will share with you the title of the book later. Actually, I think is in the chat because it's now open access, the first book that came out of this network of research, in which basically the research I'm presenting today is published. Anyway, let me share my screen with you. I hope this works. Let me know if there is any problem with it. Now I'm trying to put it full screen. All right. So maybe already from the title, you can say, why hidden in plain sight? This is part of my introduction. Most of you probably are already familiar with some of the research existing on African cinema, African media, and platforms in this landscape, and especially Nollywood. And you might know that much of the research that exists until today on these topics in relation to Nollywood has focused mostly on a few key actors. Of course, Iroko TV, which most of you might know. We will talk more in more details about these platforms. This platform later in this presentation, which is a Nigerian British American platform that was created by Jason Joku and his British colleague in the early 2010s. So this platform has attracted a lot of attention in the media and in the scholarship because He was the first major actor of platform distribution of African contents, and also with a strong African component in terms of ownership. So it is a very interesting case study. Then we have a lot of articles on Netflix presence in the African mediascape, and particularly in relation to Nollywood. So these two platforms have been those which have attracted most attention. Then you have a few articles on Showmax, which is the platform owned by DSTV MultiChoice, but very little until recently had been written on YouTube. Now, since maybe I would say 1 year or two, a few articles are coming out, but until then, my feeling was that most of what was written on YouTube was mostly like newspaper articles, not much scholarly attention on the relationship between Nollywood and YouTube. But my sort of starting point for this research was the clear perception after more than 15 years working on Nollywood that indeed YouTube played a very important role in the history and transformation of Nollywood over the past 2 decades. So I thought I wanted to sort of look into it more closely. A point that needs to be said in order to sort of draw the context of my presentation is, I mean, a little bit of context in terms of the history of Nollywood's economy. Most of you, again, probably already know this stuff, but the Nigerian video film industry, which emerged in the early 90s, and as a result of the introduction of new technologies, in particular the VHS. Again, most of you must know, but the emergence of this industry doesn't mean the beginning of the cinema in Nigeria. Cinema existed from the 60s, 70s, but this industry emerged as a really a cultural industry in a sense that is able to produce a huge amount of films and to penetrate the society in Nigeria and reach audiences at the Pan-African level. Anyway, what is important to keep in mind about this industry and how it was constructed and organized in the first decade and a half of its history is that it was an industry mostly based on informal transactions, was considered and has been labeled by some scholars, including Moradewuna Adejumobi, that I quote here, as an industry practicing a minor transnationalism, in the sense that it was indeed connected globally in many ways, but via alternative circuits beyond the sort of circuits of global capitalism. So you were able to consume Nollywood in New York or whatever, in the Caribbean islands or in France, but that was possible because informally you would get tapes and DVDs via piracy and other things. And that was a very interesting aspect of this industry, indeed, its capillarity and capacity to construct this sort of alternative networks. But much scholarship in the 2010s, and including my own writings, have underlined how this industry has undergone important transformations in the 2010s, and has witnessed the penetration of big corporations, including Netflix, but not only, also big television networks like, of course, DSTV MultiChoice from South Africa, and witnessed also the coming back of theater halls, so new cinema theaters in Nigeria and elsewhere in Africa, which contributed in formalizing the economy of Nollywood and somehow transforming the social organization of this industry, which was for long considered to be a popular industry made mostly by people belonging to lower and middle income classes in Nigeria. So my point here will be to try to show you how YouTube has been absorbed in the economy of Nollywood and transformed in a way to fit the needs of different kinds of professional in the industry, including historical stakeholders like the marketers, which have appropriated the use of YouTube in order to stay afloat and keep a foot in the industry. But also, as I will also discuss in the presentation, YouTube has become a platform for the emergence of new actors in the industry, like the bank TVs, which I will talk about, but also young and a sort of new generations of filmmakers and producers. Another element of context which might need, even if I guess most of you are familiar with what YouTube is, but we need to underline some of the sort of paradox that characterize this platform, because it is indeed a major platform. We might say probably the largest in terms of platforms screening audiovisual contents. It's we need to remember that YouTube is the second most visited website in the world after Google, and is owned, by the way, by Google. And it is a platform that is built on a very particular commercial formula, because it mixes professional contents and amateur contents on an economic model that sort of encourage first-time comers and do-it-yourself filmmakers to professionalize themselves and help them via in a process that help them monetize their content. But side by side with these, you also have more and more premium content available and possibility to subscribe and pay a sort of monthly subscription to get sort of eye-level professional content. Plus, you have also VOD possibilities on YouTube. So it's this very interesting mixture of elements that makes YouTube be cover all the spectrum of what screen media are today, from the sort of vernacular creativity of amateur videography and all the participatory culture of remakes and sort of all the comments, of course, and the community culture that can develop via YouTube channels and so on and so forth, plus all the professional film culture related to industries like Hollywood and the likes. So in order to historicize the presence of YouTube in Nigeria, a starting point is inevitably to talk about Iroko TV. Maybe before that, we need to say that YouTube, because already YouTube was created in the mid-2000s, and for the first couple of years, a few years of existence, it was a platform that hosted mostly, all sorts of contents, but a lot of pirated content. Those of you who were around at the time might remember that you can really find a lot of pirated contents in music and film without any consequence in a way. But very early in YouTube's history, this brought some troubles to YouTube. There was a big trial, and YouTube in a way was obliged to change the way it was organized and to basically to ask to whoever was posting content on the platform to be able to demonstrate that they own the rights to do so. So, but this is important to say because it means that in the very beginning of YouTube relationship with Nollywood, YouTube was just a network where pirated Nollywood content was streamed. And this lasted a few years because also, even if the trial I mentioned was happening in, I think, 2006, by the time people became aware of it in Nigeria in relation to Nollywood, a few more years passed by. So for all the second half of the 2000s, YouTube was only a platform where pirated versions of Nollywood films would appear. But so the very smart move that Jason Joku and Bastien Gotter did in the early 2010s was to create a official Nollywood channel, Nollywood Love, on which they would stream only Nollywood films for which they had paid the rights. And this allowed them, in a way, to also ask the platform to take off all content, Nollywood-related content that was on the platform without being regularly paid for. So in a way, by using this strategy, this couple of entrepreneurs managed pretty quickly to establish themselves as sort of an hegemonic force in the streaming of Nollywood films, which also created some, some people weren't happy about it, but that is another point of the discussion. What is important here for us to know is that this platform became an incredible example of how the online distribution of Nollywood could be successful, and it could attract viewership, because via YouTube they managed to show stats about viewership across the world, and so they were able also to show how successful Nollywood was in diaspora, and then to capitalize these evidences with investment from different funds, especially from the US. You have here some figures about the amount of money that they managed to raise. So this move was very important because it showed that, first of all, platform distribution could be a solution for Nollywood, or anyway a revenue stream. It showed that most of this capital was in the diaspora, because still, and this is still the case today, most of the people watching Nollywood online were in the diaspora back then. And also it created a sort of awareness about what it means to stream legally, because what they did with Nollywood Love channel was precisely to affirm themselves as legal distributors of Nollywood films and to counter illicit distribution on platforms. The move by Gotter and Joku, as I mentioned a moment ago, didn't go down that well with everyone in the industry. Actually, many marketers, if quite some of them at the beginning, were happy to deal with Joku, and then they accepted to offer the rights and I mean to get an official contract with Nollywood Love. They were also sort of quickly aware of the fact that this dynamic was creating a form of monopoly by Nollywood Love and later Iroko TV in the realm of streaming. Must be said, I don't know if I said it in the previous slide, that Nollywood Love lasted only a few months, basically, because very quickly it generated the data that were useful for Njoku and Gotter to get the money from the investment, but also showed its limits, because I mean, considering the traffic that they were having on their channel, Gotter and Njoku decided that it was unfair to pay that amount of revenue shares to YouTube. You must know that YouTube takes 55% of revenues produced by publicity and advertising on the platform. So they decided to move on a new platform, which they will own entirely, which is Iroko TV. But in order to do that, of course, they needed a lot of money, because to create the infrastructures of a new platform is pretty intensive in terms of investment. Anyway, so they did that and they created Iroko TV. So going back to what I was saying about the marketers, so the marketers had this double-edged reaction to Iroko TV and to Nollywood Love. On the one hand, it was important to make them aware of the potential of platform distribution and illicit distribution. On the other side, they were sort of afraid of this hegemony that was being created in the realm of distribution, which was cutting, in a way, the grass under their feet, because most of their money was made by still selling tangible copies, so DVDs and VCDs, copies of their films, and already the arrival of television and the coming back of cinemas had eroded their market. But YouTube, being so easily accessible and free, was a definitive sort of struck to their control and their economy. So many of them began to think about options to get involved into this new streaming environment. So, I mean, of course, many marketers also, this is part of Nollywood's recent history, many marketers just went out of business. They left the industry. Some of them, they moved to other sectors like hotel or estate building and stuff like that. But those who decided to stay in the industry, many of them moved still back to the East, because many of them are also mostly Igbo, and invested more in a sort of lower level industry, the so-called Asaba films, so films that were still applying the classic old Nollywood system, lower budget and use of well-known actors and more straight to video distribution. And but they applied, they innovated in a way their economy by deciding to create also YouTube channels to distribute their content. So taking the model of Nollywood Love, they established a number of YouTube channels, and now you have. It's very interesting to realize that there are a plethora of Nollywood-based YouTube channels on YouTube. Most of those that are most successful emerged indeed between 2013, 2014, 2015. And in most cases, and this is what my research tried to focus on in order to understand what is the economy of these channels, most of them are not the result of the activity of a single marketer, but are the result of a group of marketers coming together and establishing sort of, associations or conglomerates that help them aggregate more content. And also, so because on YouTube, one key element is to have new content on a very regular basis in order to sort of create a stronger fidelity from audience and to have more traffic on the channel, right? So by coming together in groups of 10, 12, 20 marketers, these guys managed both to unite their libraries, so to have more already available contents, plus to mutualize expenses for new production and so on and so forth, which help them become pretty solid, economically speaking. Also, you do also have some individual marketers who went to the platform, especially classic big names in the industry. But in most cases, these guys have been less successful because, as I could understand by doing a few interviews with people who run Nollywood YouTube channels, indeed the issue of communication around your channel and demand a specific knowledge of how the social media world works. And some of these marketers who went online at the beginning weren't really familiar with the specificities of doing business on YouTube. Anyway, what is important for my research to underline is the fact that in many ways, YouTube became at this point for this bunch of people, which had been the driving force of Nollywood economy through the 90s and had been marginalized progressively throughout the 2000s by the emergence of new corporate actors. For these guys, YouTube became a fundamental opportunity to stay afloat and reinvent their own form of minor transnational practice, that is to keep a control on what they wanted to do and keep a control on the amount of money they will get, even if, of course, they all agree on the fact that YouTube is less profitable than straight to video used to be. But what they put forward is the fact that in YouTube, they have very little constraints, while if they try to work with DSTV or for Netflix, there is a much strong editorial line that is given to them in terms of quality, technical standards, and even in terms of content. And so their freedom in a way and margin of maneuver is much smaller. We'll get back to that eventually in the question. So, but of course, other actors also decided to use YouTube in other ways. And one actor that is particularly interesting for me is the one of the bank TVs, which is a phenomenon which is very specific in a way to Nigeria. These are actors that got attracted by Nollywood for its marketing value, in the sense that Nollywood films and series were and are very much consumed by a sort of younger population. And we're talking of the beginning of the 2010, important period of also transformation of the banking sector in Nigeria, and banks were looking for strategies to attract new demographics to the banking sector. And within this landscape, we must underline that one person in particular has been particularly influential, which is Jade Oziberu, who is well known for her films like Izoken and many others. But she played a very important role at that time, around 2012, when she was working for GT Bank, I think, and she had the idea of creating a web TV for the bank, which could help attract new demographics, new people toward the bank. So she helped establishing one of the very first bank TVs, Ndani TV, and shooting the series Giddy Up, which was very successful. And as a result of the success of this initiative, other banks went into the same business, like UBA Bank, which created Red TV, Accelerate TV, which is by Access Bank, if I'm not wrong, and many others. And what is interesting about these bank TVs is that they have a very specific economic model in which they are not supposed to directly produce revenues, since their target and their objective is to attract new people to the bank. So in this sense, they have a editorial line which is pretty open to new creations, to new genres, and so on and so forth. So these banks have these bank TVs have become platforms on which new and upcoming filmmakers and artists have found a space of expression. And today, Red TV, which is it has become the most influential of these TVs, and also ventured in the production of future films that went to cinema, and also in co-productions with other countries in the region where UBA works, like Côte d'Ivoire. So it's a very interesting and quickly evolving phenomenon. And finally, YouTube also contributed in a way to promoting and circulating the work of young filmmakers. We need to know that with the process that I mentioned earlier of corporatization of Nollywood, so that is with the process that have given more spaces to big corporation in the economy of Nollywood, it became more and more difficult for young creators to find a space to get their film produced and screened above all. I've heard so many times people complaining about the so-called Alaba with suits. That is the new forces that control the industry's economy. Alaba is the big market where marketers used to rule the distribution and production of films, and Alaba with suits would be the new marketers, the people who now control the economy, which are the people of Film House, Cinema, of Silverbird, of DSTV, MultiChoice, Netflix, and so on and so forth. So for these young people, there is this sort of wall of corporate interest and intermediaries that make it difficult to enter the industry and to produce the first couple of films. And within this network, YouTube, as in many other contexts around the world, has become a platform where people can express themselves more freely. So they went on to, the short formats in particular became very important in this sense, and even competition of short films online on YouTube have been created to promote these works. And then, of course, there is all the phenomenon of influencers or comedians and stand-up comedians and so on and so forth, which also used YouTube to circulate their work. You have some stats here on the PowerPoint that tell you of some of the most successful, like Mark Angel and others. What is interesting is to see how, to make it full circle, the more established Nollywood that goes on Netflix and else has tried to co-opt these actors now into the mainstream feature film. So you have cameo participation, or really participation in the main cast of some of these guys that have become successful on social media and on YouTube, which are now as to contribute to classic, let's say classic Nollywood films, so that they bring their audience with them. So in order to conclude and keep to the time that Roberta gave me, what is interesting for me of this YouTube evolution in relationship to Nollywood is, first of all, to see the ambiguity of the position that this platform occupies in relationship to Nollywood. On the one hand, for instance, traditional actors like the marketers initially very much criticized the platform and the way it was used by certain people like Jason Njoku as an instrument of taking over of the economy of the industry. But later they discovered that they could appropriate the platform in a way that would allow them to stay in the industry by creating their own channels and so on and so forth. And today, really, YouTube is probably one of the main platform for Nollywood films, circulation and monetization. On the other hand, you also see how people like Njoku himself initially exploited the platform. They were happy with it, but then also went against it, in the sense that Njoku, after creating Iroko TV, very often talked against the marketers and their use of YouTube, saying that they were creating a culture of free access to content that was very bad for the industry, because it was giving audience the idea that you would, in any case, you will be able to access Nollywood content for free, which is another problem in a way of the effect of YouTube indeed. And then you have also the issue of creativity, the fact that some people may complain about the fact that YouTube in fact impose certain standards, but it imposes it only in a way if you accept the platform to play a role, because after a certain number of access to your channel, YouTube indeed offers the possibility to receive some sort of guidelines to supposedly help you make your channel more successful, but you're not obliged to follow them. So you do have also channels that continue to produce the sort of Nollywood that marketers believe to be successful, so films that are very long or whatever, or very dialogue-centered. So there is not an editorial line that is pushed on marketers, as you can see on platforms like Netflix or Amazon. Yeah, so I think I went through all I wanted to say. Just as I was mentioning at the beginning, this chapter has been published in a book that came out recently, which is the one you see now. So here is the link, and I think you can find it also in the chat. The book also has presentation on many others platforms, local platforms and international platforms that are active in countries of the South, in Africa and elsewhere, in order to try to understand what is the impact of these processes in countries of the South. I'll stop it here and open the floor for your questions.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. That's really, really interesting. While people think of any question, and they can use either the chat or the question and answer tab at the bottom of the screen, I will take my chair privilege and start with one. Maybe it's a big one, but I'm kind of interested. Well, there's two sides to this, I think. One is really interested in the banks coming in a sort of way, and thinking about the challenges that creatives often face with finance, and how in a sort of way banks always have shied away from the creatives because it's so much of a risky business, but instead came into this sort of TV intermediary marketer sort of role, and sort of wondering whether you think that in any ways has created more dialogue with the financial sector, whether there is any, other scope for finance of creative activities that might have, be triggered by those initial connections. So one of the side is the finance world, and the other side is the policy world. So obviously in this, you haven't spoken much about policy. My knowledge is that obviously policy doesn't intervene quite as much, obviously in Nigeria, but I wonder whether, with other countries, obviously with international platforms like YouTube, you have a strong policy position where people allow the platform to enter or not to enter or negotiate policy-wise, also this kind of global corporate coming in different countries. And I wonder whether you have seen any changes on the relationship also policy with YouTube over time in Nigeria.
Thank you very much. These are both very important questions. Indeed, the issue of banks is interesting because, as you mentioned, and in Nigeria in particular, banks were very kept, a distance from the industry for a long time because they couldn't really read it in a way, read the way it works. And this is the same in most sub-Saharan African countries in relation to cinema. The bank sector is not supporting this, the producers at all. Exception for South Africa, of course, and a couple of other places. But I mean, one could expect that by the fact that they're producing their own content, they would become more tolerant. But I don't have any, to be honest, any example of an increase in this collaboration. I think that there are maybe some specific case. I'm imagining, even if I don't have specific, really, I don't have specific examples, but maybe Jade Oziberu, because of her relationship, because she also created Ndani, and so on and so forth, managed to maybe get a loan from a bank, from her bank. But it's the bank remained pretty far from the industry as far as I know. Maybe people in the audience, I saw a couple of names of people who might know better than me. But I mean, I don't think, at least for what I know, that there has not been a qualitative transformation in the relationship. I think most of all that bank TVs have been an instrumental move by banks to use the industry for their own, objectives rather than a conscious transformation of the way it works. And in what concerns the policies, that also is a very interesting topic, which would require an entire presentation in a way. But as you mentioned, there again, Nollywood, in many ways, and people like to repeat this sort of concept to researchers, is that Nollywood exists despite the Nigerian state, because in many ways it emerged with a very strong mistrust among professionals toward the role that the state could have. And we need to remember that Nigeria in the 90s in particular was a very dysfunctional system in an intense economic, political crisis, going through two authoritarian regimes, Babangida and then Sani Abacha. So it was a very complicated and turbulent period in which the industry managed, despite indeed the situation of the state, to emerge and to consolidate. And for a long time, even through the first half of the 2000s, state interventions were very opportunistic. We're trying to use the industry as a platform for visibility or exploit the fact that maybe, festivals across the world were interested in what Nollywood was, so they would send a delegation, but just for the pleasure of having a trip in Cannes or in Berlin and not to really represent the industry. So the mistrust has continued quite for long, but in the 2010s, there have been a few stronger intervention, starting with Goodluck Jonathan as a president, who also tried to co-opt in a way the industry in support for his candidacy, but also indeed created some framework for funding. And later also Buhari did something in that direction. But still, the funding part is the one that is most discontinuous and has been very much criticized by industry stakeholders because exposed to corruption, nepotism, and all sorts of things. The part which is more maybe interesting to study is regulation, and there you have a number of laws that have come into force, amendment and transformation of the broadcasting code, for instance, and an attempt, particularly during the Buhari tenure, there was a very strong take on social networks because there was also sort of a more authoritarian orientation in that sense of heavier censorship. So there have been, during the Buhari tenure, also a shutting down of Twitter, for instance, stuff like this. So there was a law which, as far as I know, never really came into force, but was supposed to be a very strong decree to frame the activity of international companies and social networks, more the social networks than the YouTube and Netflix of this world, but that would have applied. And also there is finally the fiscal part of it, which also the state is trying to structure better in order to extract more revenues. But if you want to look at all the history of this, I would say that in most cases for the state, what is more scary is internal dissent than external. So they tend to have a relatively tolerant attitude with international companies as far as they collaborate in keeping control of what is said inside the country. So these go back and forth. With Twitter, they went to the clash when Twitter was very much in support of, let's say, the no SARS movement, but then with X or whatever, a more sort of with another type of ideological orientation, there is less clash in that sense. But again, probably people in the audience might have even more up-to-date elements to.
Well, thank you. Those were very clear answers. Actually, I might build because it is connected to what you were just saying. And David comment, I think, was one to say that more banks are getting involved in Nollywood financing now. So building on what you were just saying, even though not at a great level, and this is largely because there's a lot of data and research opacity in the industry, and that's a problem I'm personally trying to solve. So I think that's a really good point. Obviously, if the industry data and finance is not that clear, then banks are not going to be able to finance or support things. But here's a question which is again related. From your studies and experience, what are the ways that research inside work can help stakeholders make better financial and commercial decisions in Hollywood? What are some of the blind spots to explore? What factors in the value chain need more spotlighting? So that's a really interesting question as well. And I wonder
which one is it? So I go back. What is it? Okay, yes, just because I visualize it better if I can read it myself, right? Inside work, I get to finish a commercial decision in Nollywood. Well, this is a big question, right? And I think there again, people might have different answers to that. But one point which is not much discussed, but I think, and in many people, I mean, it's not discussed in the media or even in studies, but comes up often in discussions with professionals, is that people would like to have more proper professionalized sale agents, for instance. So what is missing is sort of intermediaries able to do the work of negotiating contracts the right way, protecting the rights the right way, and who are legally aware but really professionally skilled in order to do this work. Because what still happens in most countries and in Nigeria as well is often that the person who deal with these companies and deal with all this part is not a person that is formed for that, is maybe one of the person in the production team, or maybe just the director or the producer, according to the scale of the production team. But we are still in many cases in the context of production companies that do basically everything, right? And so many people complain about the fact that they end up being screwed and they figure that out when it's too late. Because I mean, this one often tricky issue is the issue of do you give out exclusive rights or only regionally exclusive rights? All this, the way you can better exploit the fact that your film can be watched in different regions, on different platforms, and so on and so forth. Because today the environment is so complicated and so stratified, and people struggle to orient themselves into that. So one thing is that. Then I don't know if I got the question right? Is what are the different professions that are more under strains, and what people complain more about? Of course, there is writing always, and the issue of writing is even more complicated now with the AI. And we are having a roundtable on AI in Nollywood in June at a conference there, because I'm very intrigued to know, because from outside you can't really understand, but the AI thing is particularly interesting in industries like Nollywood, where things are already very much unregulated. So there is a lot of room for sort of Wild West type of situation in which people try everything, and And probably the category that for now is the more vulnerable to it is the category of scriptwriter, which are not protected and historically lack funding. They are, I mean, in projects, generally, smaller the project is, the smaller is the amount of money it goes toward writing. And so writing is a very big part. And also people complain about producers, professional producers. I mean, there is a tendency to, in the industry by marketers, for instance, to say that they know their audience, right? But there is no method to that. They just pretend they know because they've been in the industry. And so, yeah, that's another element. We could talk much longer about that, but I see that there are other questions.
Yes, I will go to Rita in a second. She has a lot of questions, so maybe we'll pick up one or two. But I wanted to, because it connects, I think, to go back to Jen question, because she's asking, you know, after, you know, you talked about this YouTube playing this important role from the informal market to the start of Nollywood, and now obviously as a space potentially experimentation, is do you see YouTube now as a route for financially sustainable, you know, production? And so is there a scope for actually YouTube to really make a difference, especially I suppose for that new talent element that you were talking about in your presentation? Or do you think it's still a challenge?
It's a delicate question in a sense that if we were talking like 15 years ago, nobody would have said that they would have liked to use YouTube as a platform, right? There was clearly much more ownership of the whole process at the time of analog and early digital media. The problem today in most of the cases that because I didn't have the time to talk about that, but there have been a phase in which people thought, okay, since the future is platform, let's go and try to build our own platforms. But we all know this has happened in so many different industries across the world, but it's not enough. Platforms are very costly to, you know, you need a lot of an important capital at the beginning to build up a platform that can be functional. And this is a real challenge for an economy like Nollywood. Plus, it's a world in which we are going more and more toward a sort of concentration and polarization around some few big actors in that field. So the Nollywood professionals are left with not that many options, right? Either you go toward a big actor that is either a big streamer or a big, you know, DSTV, Canal Plus of this world, which as the, you know, sometimes give you more money, but it's not true, because one thing that is not often or not enough said is that these big actors have managed to build a reputation of quality, but as a matter of fact, they generally pay very little money, and they are there around Africa precisely because they managed to find ways to extract content for very little money. Like Canal Plus pay 400 euros an episode and stuff like this, and DSTV is more or less the same, and even Netflix. For the majority of the content, Nollywood content it pays very little fees. It has a sort of difference because it tries also sometime to get some bigger film, but they also just want quantity because they need to fill their catalog. But I mean, that is one option. And the other one is YouTube. And this is the same in many other African countries. Like YouTube is really becoming the big, and not only in Africa and India. I've talked with colleagues in India, Brazil. It's all over the place. It's becoming the alternative to the sort of bottleneck of big platforms. Well, of course, in some of the southern countries, you have now some local platform which have become big enough, but they are sort of similar in their logics, right? So YouTube has this big difference, which is the fact that it allows larger freedom in terms of editorial choices, and as a sort of rule of revenue share, with it's inevitably unjust. Like, it's clearly, you know, they takes a lot, but it also makes sense because they provide everything, right? The infrastructure is there, the reach, you can reach everyone you want on the world if you're good enough in selling your stuff. Then, the discourse would need to be nuanced, because there are certain African countries, for instance, where you are not allowed to monetize. So it's Cameroon, for instance, is just behind the corner from Nigeria, but if you're setting up your channel in Cameroon, you cannot monetize. So you have to go through someone who opened the channel for you in France or whatever, in England or in Nigeria. Nigeria is a particular case because it's, as far as I know, I think the only country or the one of the very few countries which has a YouTube office, and YouTube is really investing a lot in Nigeria in terms of contents. So this makes a bit of a difference because the company itself is investing in the country. But I mean, long story short, I think that until 10 to 15 years ago, when there was some sort of infrastructure for the economy to be autonomous and to own sort of circulation, YouTube would have not been an option, not an interesting one. But today, it's one of the very few that is still there for people to monetize their content.
Mhm. Thank you, Alessandro. Yeah, Rita has multiple questions, but maybe we might pick one because, and I think in a way you were starting to talk of some of the, I think, question of Rita really about how Nigeria sort of compares internationally. So you did mention a few things. So I'll pick the one on piracy because maybe that's the one we haven't touched so much. You know, have you looked into piracy of films, for example, or personal uploadings and other work? So in a sort of way, again, how does Nigeria compare to other national, you know, landscape in other countries, maybe from the global south being, you know, an interesting comparison in terms of piracy?
Well, I did look into piracy more historical in a way, because there is a tendency to also consider, on the one hand, piracy as a particular problem of Nollywood, and specifically Nollywood after internet, while piracy has been a topic of debate in Nigeria since a long time. And you have instances of protest and debate, political debate around piracy, for instance, in the 70s around the music industry, before then on literature. So, it's very interesting also because it helps you understand that the state has also acted on it cyclically and has done things. This is just to contextualize. But then what is interesting in Nigeria historically is the fact that Nollywood itself, as one could almost say that its economic origin is very tied to the economy of piracy. This has been written by several scholars, including myself, but Brian Larkin has written very interesting stuff on this, to underline the fact that what really made the early Nollywood possible was the fact that marketers already controlled the piracy of foreign content in Nigeria. So they had a network of distribution on VHS of content, which wasn't Nigerian, but it was there, right? And the big shift is when they decided that they could also deal on locally produced content on those same networks. That has also contributed in creating a very strong ambiguity around what piracy is in Nollywood, because from the start there are rumors of around the marketers being opaque in whatever they do, dealing part, you know, selling some of the copies licitly, some others in piracy and whatever, and nobody has a really clear picture on that. What I have sort of understood with the interviews is also that is a you definitely can be facing and talking with a marketer who does both things, also on the same film and on purpose, because selling some copies licitly, you sell them a certain amount of money and you need to share. You don't share because in most cases, marketers never sign contracts based on sharing revenues, but on flat deals. So a marketer would buy a film from a producer, independent producer, and that's it. He just paid the money and then it does whatever it wants with the film. But then what marketers would do is to sell, let's say, the first 10,000 copies on a licit market that will cost, let's say, 1,000 copy in a DVD, a VCD. That was like the rates back in the past, or less. Anyway, and then you sell other copies on the pirate market, less quality and much cheaper, but it's still sort of the same people who are selling them, but it's just to reach a different demography and different type of buyers. So this is just to make you understand how complicated this whole thing is and how non-transparent is the separation between piracy and non-piracy. What is interesting today is that for many producers, piracy has become a bit less of a problem in a sense, because once they sell their film to, let's say, Netflix, they don't have other ways locally to get the money. So if the film is pirated locally, it's not a problem. I even doubt, I don't have any evidence about that. But, you know, I would not be surprised if a producer also sell the film to local pirates, because if there is a damage, it would be to Netflix, and who gives a shit first? Secondly, also nobody, this is exaggerate, but Netflix is not that popular in Nigeria or in Africa because it stays with an elite, right? So the larger population doesn't really watch Netflix anyway. So Netflix doesn't lose much if those people are access the film via piracy. And so the economy of piracy in that sense has changed. Well, there is again much more to be said. It needs to be known that there is the Nigerian Copyright Commission that has a mandate to fight piracy, but the problem historically is that they don't have money. So they have a mandate. They try to do every now and then a sort of representative action of doing something that is mediatically strong, but they will never have the money to follow the full process. And secondly, people don't invest in lawyers in the production company. So even if eventually the pirates is caught, the production company tend to prefer a settlement rather than go to trial for the cost that it implies. So you have very few trials on piracy anyway.
Yeah, there is an argument also for how piracy in a sort of way promotes media education and creates new markets and potentially creates stars and other, you know, sort of, yeah. So that's obviously something that returns them back in other form of income for the producers. Yeah, I think Rita also mentioned that this is something that happens also in Ugandan cinema, so that there is a sort of trade-off of the producer, whether it's better to hold on to your rights or actually better to get something out of it anyhow, and don't forget about piracy. So that's also interesting. There is that attitude. We've got 2 minutes left, so I don't think we have time for another question, but I have time to say thank you again, Alessandro, for your time, for your really interesting research and for answering all our questions. And just a reminder to everybody else that we'll have another seminar on the 28th of February, so join us again and keep the conversation going, and obviously